only at night.
Mike, Margaret, and Donna Hall were inseparable. Not only were they both high school sweethearts, but they both knew each other for quite some time. 10 years to be exact. Mike Margaret was a 21-year-old high school graduate of Tucker High School. Donna Hall was also a high school graduate. She was 18 years old and had recently graduated from Freeman High School. Mike Margaret lived up in rural West Virginia. Him and Donna were well known around the neighborhood and were said to have had many friends. It was said that Mike was an outdoors type of person and loved spending most of his time hunting and fishing. Mike, Margaret, and Donna Hall lived a particularly simple life, except for the alleged rumors concerning the young drug culture back then. It was said that both Mike, Margaret, and Donna Hall were dipping and dabbing into selling and soliciting drugs, allegedly, of course. At the time in which Mike, Margaret, and Donna Hall went missing while out camping together, it was alleged that Mike, Margaret, and Donna Hall had a large amount of money on them and were alleged to have met up with someone to make a quick drug deal. On August 17, 1984, both Donna Hall and Michael Margaret had told both of their respected family members that they were going out camping together. It was said that on that same night, they stopped by a gathering of some sort involving a few of their friends between the hours of 11 to 11:30 that night. Friends told investigators that the couple left Friends at around 12 midnight on August 18, 1984. Friends and family had already assumed that both Mike, Margaret, and Donna Hall had decided to go camping for the weekend. The weekend came and went with no signs of Mike, Margaret, and Donna Hall. On Monday morning, family members of the couple decided to file a missing persons report. Later on in the day, a retired dentist who owned property near the Patterson Road area of West Virginia found the bodies of both Mike and Donna near a wooded area. He first came across Mike's Jeep that had been backed up into a ravine. When he looked into the Jeep, he noticed splatters of blood inside. The passenger door had been open. He walked further down the trail with his dog when he noticed a red blanket on the ground. That's when he decided to walk a bit further down the trail where he noticed the deceased bodies of both Mike, Margaret, and Donna Hall. They were both viciously stabbed. Suspect is known to have type A blood, given the DNA evidence collected at the scene. Investigators also believe that the unknown suspect is known to have had visible scarring, possibly on his hands or forearms, as a result of Mike Margaret fighting with the perpetrator at the scene. Mike Margaret was said to have had visible defensive wounds on both of his hands. Authorities also believe that there are individuals connected to Mike Margaret and Donna Hall that could have possibly known what had occurred on the day that Mike Margaret and Donna Hall were killed, but are either too afraid to come forward and speak or have some type of inclination as to who the suspect was. The medical examiner also concluded that both Mike Margaret and Donna Hall were drugged with large amounts of Demerol, an opioid sedative similar to morphine used to treat moderate to severe pain. Even though at the time there were conflicting rumors centered around Mike Margaret and Donna Hall's involvement with drugs, it was still an alleged accusation, as Donna Hall's home not too far from Castile and close to King's Crossing Apartments. No additional drugs were ever found. It was also said that Donna's drug intake of Demerol being in her system had been more of the amount of what Mike had in his system. The medical examiner also concluded that Mike, Margaret, and Donna Hall were killed between the hours of 1 and 2 a.m., indicating that they were killed not too long after leaving their friend's house at around 12 midnight. Was it possible that someone close to them knew about their whereabouts right after leaving their friend's house? Were they followed, or was it a stranger who watched them closely as they drove away and stopped near the woods? If you have any information on the murders of both Mike Margaret and Donna Hall, please call the Henrico County Cold Case Unit at 804-501-5304. That's 804-501-5304. You can remain anonymous.
Only at night.
Juanita Jones was a 32-year-old motivated young woman who loved cooking. She had a passion for it. In fact, she had worked 2 jobs in order to save up enough money to open up her own restaurant. She was going to call it Down Home Barbecue. Juanita Jones was ready to turn her dream into a reality and had already even put in her 2 weeks' notice at Circle K to begin her transition as an independent restaurant owner. She bought a modestly sized restaurant not too far from where she had been currently living in Houghton. Juanita Jones spent some time in the Army. She joined right after graduating from Houghton High School. Family members always knew her as a strong, independent, and driven person. She had also later married, but after a period of time returned back home to be closer to friends and family near Bossier Parish. Betty Harper, a childhood friend of Jones, recalls being the one that remained in the parish area near Jones and remembers visiting Juanita at the Circle K where Juanita worked. On the night of Juanita Jones's murder, however, Betty Harper had not stopped at the Circle K since she was off from work on that fateful night. Juanita was found shot in the head by a customer who had stepped into the Circle K not too long after the incident. The customer then called police. A Louisiana state trooper by the name of Mac responded to the call about 10 minutes after leaving the Circle K station. Juanita Jones was quickly taken to a local hospital where she had succumbed to her injuries 5 days later. Louisiana State Police received many leads, but none were consistent, and most lacked the information and evidence needed to make an arrest. No cameras were installed at the scene. Family members suspect that the person involved had to have been someone close to Juanita, being that they were familiar with her schedule. Juanita's mother kept Juanita's restaurant open for several years as a symbol of love and respect for Juanita's honor. If you have any information leading to an arrest pertaining to Juanita Jones's murder, please call the Bossier Sheriff's Office at 318-965-2203. That's 318-965-2203, or call Bossier Crime Stoppers at 318-424-4100. 318-424-4100. You can remain anonymous.
Only at night.
It was around 3:18 p.m. on September 10, 1984, when 2 buffet stewards were getting ready to start their work shifts while on a train headed towards London, Paddington. While one steward stood up and got ready to start his shift, the chief steward sitting right by him had overheard one of the 2 unidentified men sitting beside them say, "That's him, the one with the tash," meaning mustache. The chief steward thought of the remark as suspicious, being that it seemed like both men were planning to rob the buffet. The chief steward later asked his colleague to check up on the 2 unidentified men to see if whether or not he was able to identify them both. Although he didn't recognize the 2 men, he did remember how they looked. One was at around 6'2" to 6'3" inches tall, had scruffy hair and a spotty complexion. The other had a small mustache, was slim built, and was said to have looked like he was at around his early 20s. It was said that the 2 men got up to get off the train shortly around 10 minutes before 4 p.m. near Bristol Parkway, walking out towards the station exit. The 2 men got off Bristol Parkway only after they realized that the person that they were looking for was not on the train. Later during the day, Mark Yendell, another steward wearing a mustache, had been preparing to start his shift with his other work colleague. It was around 7:30 p.m. when the train that Mark Yandell and his colleague were in had been making its way from Temple Meads back to Bristol, where Mark and his colleague would head back home. Mark was known to a few regular passengers. Both Mark and his colleague regularly worked together, and Mark was known to have a distinctive work style. He rarely wore his complete work uniform and was even a regular waiter to a few passengers. Mark Yendell was married and had a 2-year-old baby girl at home. At around 9:10, Mark and his colleague had finished their shift. Mark headed out towards the main exit, where he left his red Lancia car parked outside near the driveway. Mark had been ambushed by 2 unidentified men, hit in the head by a blunt force object, and was forced into the back passenger seat of his own car while both suspects drove off. The car was later left by the water's edge on Welsh Back. His body was then thrown and dumped in the river. Both suspects left Mark's car on scene, where both were never to be seen again. On Wednesday, September 12, 1984, at almost 1:30 in the morning, an English patrolman discovered Mark's car parked near the water's edge. The patrolman walked a few feet further away from the car, following a bloody trail between the car and through the docks, where he discovered Mark's lifeless body floating in 14 feet of shallow water. Mark Yandell had been robbed. It was later said to have become a thoughtless killing with no motive. The first suspect on scene had dark brown hair, was said to have a light mustache, and had been at around 5'6" tall. The second known suspect was known to have been at around 6'2" to 6'3" tall, slim built with somewhat of a curly hair texture. He was said to have been wearing a form lumber jacket with an off-white collar. The smaller assailant was known to have been wearing a burgundy body warmer with a strap around the waistband. A witness was said to have seen a white Mark IV, possibly a Cortina, slowly drive into the parking lot where Mark was taken. The witness stated that it seemed like the person driving the car had been trying to find a parking space for his car. The witness then claims that the person driving the white Cortina had allegedly stopped near the exit where Mark Yandell was said to have been murdered. The passenger stopped to speak to a heavy-set man wearing a white collared shirt. If you have any information regarding the unsolved murder of Mark Yendell, please call Detective Sergeant Pete Frake and the Major Crime Review Team on 101 at 44-1275-375-787, 44-1275-375-787. You can remain anonymous.